Number 1. Screams. The first time I heard it, it woke me up in the middle of the night. I live in a country home on a pretty big piece of property. I am not close enough to anyone else's property that I should be able to hear anything that wasn't on my land. So this sound had to be coming from my land, and it sounded like someone was screaming in pain. I got up and went to the back door and opened it. I wanted to make sure that I was hearing what I thought I had heard, but the moment I went outside, the noise stopped. I couldn't tell what direction it had come from, and I couldn't tell exactly what it was. So, after dismissing it, I soon just went to bed. The following day, I went searching around my property to see if I could find anything that would tell me what or who had been making those noises. But there was nothing that was out of the ordinary, so I eventually gave up and quickly forgot all about it. That was until several nights later. Once again, I was sleeping when I heard the noises coming from outside. It was the same as before. It sounded like a human screaming in pain, but I couldn't be sure until I heard it clearer. As I had before, I went to the back door of the house, quickly, so I could open it this time and get a better read on what I was hearing. I did hear it a few times when I was outside. There was no doubt at all. It was a person screaming in pain, but the screaming abruptly stopped, like it had done before. This time I began calling out to whoever was making the noises. If there was someone out there in pain, I wanted to be able to help them, but I didn't hear any answers back. I grabbed a flashlight and began looking out in the direction that I heard the noises coming from. I spent a bit of time with the flashlight, looking around, but it was to no avail. I heard no answers to my calling out, and I didn't find anything to indicate who had been making those screaming noises. The following morning, I encountered pretty much exactly what had happened before. There was no sign of anything being different, and no indication at all that anyone had been on my property. This time it was much harder to forget about, though. I knew something weird was going on, but I had no idea what. But there wasn't a whole lot that I could do about it. Since it had happened 2 times already, I began wondering if it would happen again. I began sleeping a lot lighter during the next few nights. It took a few nights, but it finally happened again. I was barely dozing off when I heard the screams taking place yet again. This time I was prepared and ran out the door with my flashlight. Again I began calling out. Some screams were given in return, but there were no responses to my yells other than the screaming. I was able to tell where it was coming from before the screaming stopped again for the 3rd time. But once again, despite my looking around for whomever had been screaming, I was unable to find anything. I knew, though, by that point, that I had really had enough of whatever was going on. The next day I called the police and they came out. I explained what had happened and took them in the direction I had been hearing the screams from. This time, though, there was something found. On the barbed wire fence that surrounded my property, there was a lot of blood on the barbed wire. It was as if someone had been caught hard by the barbs, and it opened up some pretty nasty wounds. The police did a search of the area. They also questioned my neighbors to see if any of them had injured family members. No one knew anything about what had happened, and no one had been injured by barbed wire. I never heard the screaming again after that. It makes me believe that one of the neighbors had been behind it, because it only stopped after the police had gotten involved. But I never knew who had done it, and why they never answered my calls back to them. All I had were 3 nights of screaming and a bloody fence. Number 2. The Encounter. This was such a really strange thing that happened to me when I was younger. Back then I used to explore the forests that were around my home. There wasn't a whole lot to do back then other than that, and we lived in a rural area, so I often could be found out there in the woods, just looking around. I never really knew where I was going, and was often just wandering aimlessly. There would be many times where I would get lost, and it would take me a long time to find my way home. But I did always get home with no problem. If I got home late, my parents never really thought anything of it, because they all did the same things when they were younger. However, with all the times I went out exploring, I really only had this one story to tell, because it was the only time something out of the ordinary happened. I heard something that definitely sounded human, making some noises. Running into others wasn't something that happened, so I was surprised. And the sound made it seem like whoever I was hearing was in pain, so I was worried that something bad had happened. I went in the direction of the sounds, and eventually came across something I never would have believed if I hadn't seen it myself. There was a person laying on the ground, and he was wrapped up in barbed wire. He was a little older than me, a teenager, but not yet an adult. I had never seen him before, whether it was at school or just around, but I could tell that he had to have been tied up by someone else and left there. When he must have heard me getting closer to him, he began to look around. When seeing me, he began asking me to help him get untied from the barbed wire. I immediately asked him who did this to him, which was a strange question, as I was unlikely to know whatever name he answered with. He immediately deflected the question and struggled with a few uhs before reiterating that he wanted me to help him. I wasn't in any hurry to get my hands all over a bunch of barbed wire, so I had to be careful. I also didn't want to make him get even more hurt than he already was, so I tried to be careful in helping him up to a sitting position. It was difficult as hell getting the wire off the guy, and I knew I had pricked my fingers on the barbs more than once, and he had gotten hurt a few times too. During the entire time, though, I kept trying to talk to him about what had happened and who had done this to him. He was really dodgy with his answers, and I was unsure what actually was going on. In fact, after a little while, I began to feel a little uneasy about helping the guy too. When I finally got his hands loose, the guy was able to help me untie him from the rest of the wire, and he was doing so really quickly, even at the risk of hurting himself. But I was worried he was going to hurt me, so I just stood back, and I let him take off the rest of the barbed wire all by himself. He hurt himself a few times doing so, and by this point, he was letting his emotions overcome him as well. The guy was cussing angrily and doing his best to get the stuff off of him. As soon as he had worked all the barbed wire off of his body, he violently threw it to the ground, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pocket knife. He was looking at me when he opened the knife up, and I was immediately freaked out. Even though I had just helped him out of that painful predicament, I was sure that he was about to attack me. I was scared to death. He was much bigger than I was, and I didn't think that I would have much of a defense against him. He asked me a name, and asked if I was familiar with that name. I don't recall it, but I had no idea who it was. I let him know. The look in his eye told me that he didn't believe me. I guess it was the name of whoever had done this to him. And if he thought that I knew that person, he would have taken it out on me. Fortunately, the look on his face changed. Maybe he realized if I had anything to do with the guy who had done this to him, I wouldn't have helped him escape. He closed up the knife, and then without another word to me, he took off running in the opposite direction. I had to sit down and catch my breath and get my wits about me before I was able to begin heading home. I really had expected this guy to try and hurt me, but he didn't. But he sure scared the living daylights out of me. When I got home, I told my parents about it and brought up the name that he'd asked me about. They didn't seem to know it either, but told me the next time I went out, I should probably take my pocket knife with me too. Hey, this happened in the 1970s, so that was a reasonable answer rather than, don't go out hiking anymore. Number 3. The Pickup. I've been driving that old F-150 since before my father passed, and it had never once failed to start, until the night I needed it more than anything. I was halfway down a gravel back road that cut between two long-abandoned farms, the kind of place where the county stopped maintaining the fences years ago, and the trees leaned in, as if they were listening. I had taken the road out of habit. It was the fastest way home, even though every time I used it, I told myself I'd stop. The last stretch ran past the remains of the old Mercer place. It was just a collapsed barn, a chimney that refused to fall, and acres of nothing but weeds and rusted junk cars. Teenagers used to dare each other to camp out there. Nobody does anymore. The truck's headlights flickered, once, twice, then went black. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died, as if someone had reached inside and pinched off the fuel line. I coasted to a stop in the middle of the road. No, come on, I muttered, turning the key again. The only sound was the cicadas, thrumming through the trees, and the faint tick of the cooling engine. The moon was hiding behind a thick layer of clouds, so without the headlights, I could barely see the road in front of me. I tried the key again. Click. Again. Click. The dashboard stayed dark. I grabbed my phone. 0 bars. Expected, but still a punch to the chest. I had told myself it was fine. I'd grown up in the country. A dead truck on a dirt road wasn't exactly a horror movie. I'd grabbed the tool bag from behind the seat, checked the battery cables, maybe kicked the starter out of spite. Worst case, I'd walk the 1.5 miles to the old feed store and use a landline that somehow still worked. I opened the door and stepped out onto the gravel. That's when I heard it. A slow, dragging shuffle. Not in the trees, behind the truck. I froze, one hand still gripping the door. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, stepping awkwardly through the brush. But animals don't usually walk in rhythm. They don't take long, deliberate steps, like they're pacing themselves. I shut the truck door quietly and backed toward the front, listening. The sound stopped. Then, the faint crunch of gravel came from the opposite side of the truck, like something had circled around while I wasn't looking. I forced myself to breathe. The Mercer place, the stories, kids talking about a man who wandered those fields long after the farm went under, searching for something he'd lost. They were ghost stories, nothing more. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. Silence, except for the insects. I climbed back into the truck and locked the doors. I don't know why. It's not like the thin metal frame would stop anything determined, but it made me feel less exposed. I tried the key one more time, on the off chance that the universe was feeling generous. Click. Then the headlights came on. Not mine. These were somewhere behind me, off the road, glowing through the trees like 2 pale orbs. They didn't move. They didn't sway. They just appeared, as if someone had flicked on a pair of floodlights deep in the woods. I twisted around on my seat, squinting through the back window. The lights looked too high to be a four-wheeler, too dim to be a truck, and too steady to be someone holding a flashlight. They were perfectly still, perfectly level, like eyes. I blinked hard. They blinked back. I don't remember deciding to try the key again. My hand moved on its own, like instinct had finally overridden fear. The truck roared to life. I didn't look back. I had the wheel cranked and my foot on the floor before the belts had even finished squealing. Gravel sprayed, the back end fishtailed, and for a second I thought the engine would stall again. But it held. As I tore down the road, the trees streaking past, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. The two pale lights were suddenly right at the edge of the road, and they were moving. I didn't slow down until I hit pavement. Even then, I kept checking the mirror, expecting those lights, whatever they were, to appear behind me, gliding along the asphalt without sound. When I finally got home, I shut the truck off and immediately tried restarting it. Started perfectly. The truck hasn't broken down once since, but sometimes, driving at night, I catch a faint glow in the trees behind me. Two pale circles, perfectly level, keeping pace just long enough to let me know the road remembers me, and that whatever I saw that night isn't done. Number 4. The Black Dog. In 1986, I moved to an old and lower-class part of Portland, Oregon. I was 21 and had just gotten out of the Air Force. It was good to be free and not have to say, "Airman Clark reports as ordered," every time a superior addressed me. From the day I moved into the 2-story apartment, I felt a dark, weird presence in the area. Not exactly evil, but it put me on edge. Many strange things happened in that apartment, but I'll focus on the subject of the title for this entry. 3 blocks from me sat an old cemetery called Lone Fir. It's listed as one of the most haunted places in Portland. There also used to be an insane asylum in Hawthorne Boulevard that stood in the 1800s to the early 1900s, and some of the patients are buried there. One night I dreamed a skinny black dog with glowing blue eyes was chasing me down Belmont by my apartment. I was flying backwards away from him and getting away. He had floppy ears and wasn't making a sound. His eyes scared me the most because they had lighter blue glowing pupils that looked aggressive and intense. I wondered if he guarded the cemetery, as since then I've heard those dogs are seen a lot of places like that. He didn't catch me, and I woke up. It could have just been a dream, but you never know. A few years ago I moved back to the area and had to deliver pizza to that apartment. The eerie feeling was gone, but it was weird seeing it again. On a lighter note, I was kind of a prankster back then. I had a mannequin that I took apart and stuck in the dumpster. I placed one arm with its hand sticking up and wondered who would think it was real. I bet the garbage guys got a kick out of that. Thanks for reading this, KOC. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, as usual, I want to thank all my paid Patreon members, starting with 2 of my 3 VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. Also want to thank Heidi H, Chronic J, Sticky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Kelli Clark, who wrote the last story in today's video, and Broken Angel. And I also want to thank my 3rd VIP, Pumpkin Moo, and Pepper 2. So sorry it's taken about 2 weeks to get a new full video out. I know I came out with a short, but I decided to take the week of Thanksgiving off because usually I'm always frantic during that week. This week I just took it easy. I had a really good Thanksgiving and I hope that you had one too. Please, if you celebrate Thanksgiving, please let me know in the comments what you had, maybe what was the best thing that you had to eat, and let me know how you spent your time, and as usual, I'll try to get back to everybody. But in the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat and you'd like to be, please hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of new content. Leave me a comment which I'll do my best to get back to. And consider sharing the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.